I've been caught, but I'm keeping on check. And I've been taught, but I'm keeping on check. And I've been broken, but I'm keeping.
Good afternoon, good evening. This is Dove Tusman. You're back on equal footing. Wow, a lot has happened since our last show. We did a pre-election show last time, and I made a prediction at the end of that show, which is more about partisan realignment, a lot of which was spot on. We were joined by longtime campaign strategist Hank Scheinkoff and Yerucham Silber, who's a top lobbyist for the Orthodox Jewish community to both parties. And one of the things we talked about coming into the election was the realignment of the parties, and really the large gender gap, the movement of the rural white vote, particularly the non-college educated rural white vote to the Republican Party, the fracturing of the coalition of unions with the Democratic Party, and the move of the suburbs to the Democratic Party. And you had suburbs that were originally Democratic and then became Reagan Democrats back in the 80s that have now come back to the Democratic Party. Now, all that, as it ended up, was not enough to make my prediction true. It wasn't a statement of political or position or partisanship. I just thought that the female vote was going to come in stronger than it did for Harris. I thought that the polls had probably corrected a lot of the methodology issues that systemically had underestimated Trump's strength in 2016 and 2020 presidential elections. But again, I was wrong. Now, as we now are in the aftermath of Tuesday, roughly half of the country, 52% or so, are probably feeling elated. Might be exaggerating. I know there are a number of people that tepidly support either candidate, but a good around half of the country has been celebrating over the last couple of days a new age. Roughly half of the country, 48%, is feeling probably despondent. And I think often when we have these elections, particularly ones where there's a potential sweep, and right now it looks as if the Republican Party has taken the White House, certainly the Senate, and most likely the House, it's tempting to think about it as a massive landslide. And it is in relative terms. Remember, we live in a two-party presidential system, not a parliamentary system, where you have lots of smaller pockets, cohorts represented. And so when it's a winner take all. And so when you have this type of result, it feels like there's a massive mandate. And yet it's important to remember that it's only a little bit over half of the populace. Now, why am I saying that? You know, if you listen to this show over time, that we're not a political show. We're not here tonight to try to convince you that the next 4 years are going to be awesome, or that you need to move to Canada because democracy and its institutions are going to be overthrown. What we are here to talk about is the impact on our community, on our individual and collective unity, or lack thereof, even our mental health at the level of the familial unit. These big tectonic shifts have sometimes invisible and subconscious impacts on our community that are felt only over long periods of time. But we've become increasingly aware of how our Jewish American diaspora has reacted to the political circumstances of the last 10 years, the tumult, and particularly, of course, in the context of what's going on in Israel, it feels all the more important. And so here are two erudite voices tonight to help us glean the lessons, to help us look at what happened on Tuesday in historical context. You know, I was talking to one of our guests earlier this evening, and I hope I'm quoting this right, but you see these T-shirts that say, stay calm, and relax and stay calm. And I think that's part of the objective tonight, because in the historical context, I don't want to give away any of our guests' thunder, But these massive changes, sometimes, historically, are not as unique, or simply I should say are not unique. And, we've gone through massive change before and survived and gone down the other side. There are also spiritual lessons to be gleaned. Yes, I said it's spiritual lessons to be gleaned from a presidential election. So without further ado, I want to introduce two wonderful guests. They've been guests before over the years, and I love the fact that we're having them together on the show tonight. Should make for some really interesting dialogue. I want to start by introducing my friend and mentor, Rabbi Simon Jacobson. Rabbi Jacobson, I think, is one of the most important Jewish voices in the world alive today. He's a pioneering speaker and educator. He's a mentor to literally thousands, and I mean that collectively and also individually. He seems to remember the circumstances, situations of each of the people that he'll mentor and work with spiritually. He's the author of the global best-selling book, Toward a Meaningful Life, that sold well over 500,000 copies to date. It's been translated into too many languages to read out right now. Rabbi Jacobson leads the Meaningful Life Center. The New York Times has called the Meaningful Life Center a spiritual Starbucks. It bridges the secular and the spiritual through a wide variety of programming, live and also online. And it presents, and I love this, it presents the universal teachings of Torah as a blueprint for people of all backgrounds, not just the Jewish community. Rabbi Jacobson brings keen insight into the human condition. He's got this unique ability to offer clarity and direction, especially in difficult times. And he's been lauded on all sorts of different media outlets. Rabbi Jacobson, welcome back.
Thank you very much, Dov, for having me, and it's an honor and pleasure to be here with you.
Rabbi Jacobson, you are tonight paired with also a personal friend and a guest on different occasions in the past. Often the Venn diagram hasn't crossed over between you yet, but tonight, excitingly, it does. The context of the preamble I gave, it's Professor Dr. Paul Finkelman. Dr. Finkelman is a legal historian and scholar who's acclaimed in both fields. He's currently the visiting distinguished professor at University of Cincinnati College of Law for between 2017 and 2022. He was the president and chancellor of Gratz College, which is the oldest independent Jewish college in the United States, in the suburbs of Philadelphia. I want to just parenthetically say that Gratz College, as you know, Dr. Finkelman means a lot to our family. My grandparents in blessed memory who were Holocaust survivors. When they died, they endowed the Tuzman Teach-In at Gratz College, which occurs biannually and is dedicated to maintaining the memory of the Holocaust in educators around the country, in high schools and colleges around the country, and you've been instrumental in that program in the past. Dr. Finkelman is a nationally known scholar, is the author of more than 50 books and over 200 scholarly articles. The United States Supreme Court has cited his work in 6 cases, including 2 involving religious freedom. Like Rabbi Jacobson, he's appeared on many outlets, media including PBS and C-SPAN, NBC, Sunday Morning on CBS, and many of his public lectures, as in the case of Rabbi Jacobson, are also available online on YouTube and also on C-SPAN. He's published op-eds and essays in the New York Times, the Washington Post, the Atlantic, the Jewish Review of Books, New York Daily News, too many places to mention them, Jewish Exponent, etc. Okay, Dr. Finkelman, welcome back to Equal Footing.
It's a delight to be here, and I just want to say that the very first thing I had to do when I became president of Gratz was to find a speaker for this Tuzman Teach-In. And fortunately, my former teaching assistant was the head curator of the United States Holocaust Memorial Museum. So we had a great speaker that year, and a couple of years later, we managed to persuade Art Spiegelman, the author of Mouse, to do a talk at the Tuzman. And Spiegelman had stopped doing public talks years ago, but he felt this was so important that he did it. And that's because of your family. So I'm connected to you because of your family and the generosity of your family in supporting Holocaust education. And once again, it's a delight to be here. And Rabbi, it's a delight to meet you. I hope someday we actually do it in person, face to face. Where are you located, by the way, Rabbi?
I'm in Brooklyn, New York, little shtetl, you know.
Okay.
And it's a delight to meet you as well, and we shall definitely meet in person.
Oh, man.
I was born
I'm there for that.
I was born in that shtetl, and both my daughter and her wife and my sister and her husband live there. So,
oh, very nice. Okay.
Two Jews from Brooklyn. Who would have thunk it? What are the chances?
Yeah, really.
Well, let's start.
It's probably about 1 in 4.
Right.
You'll go ahead.
About as many as in Israel, probably, or some significant percentage thereof. Okay, let's start by asking the question around how different, how unique was this historically. And Professor Finkelman, maybe you can kick us off. The last couple of days, the media on both sides of the political spectrum. And by the way, I have been somewhat encouraged by, it seems like both sides have had a relatively soft tone. I say relatively over the last 48 hours, but there's a lot of talk about this being a seismic shift, a partisan realignment, a historic conjuncture, and an existential election. As a historian, putting aside the partisan politics or who won, do you think that's true, Professor Finkelman?
No, I think it's nonsense, actually. And I'll tell you why. Because a landslide victory in any political campaign in this country is when somebody wins 55% of the vote, not 52% of the vote. That's one thing. We currently have a relatively high rate of inflation. There are a lot of economic reasons for that, some of which is because President Biden inherited a horrible economy from President Trump, and in the process of putting people back to work, and we also happen to have the lowest unemployment rate in decades in this country, but that led to inflation. And the reality is that when inflation is what it has been for most of the last year and a half, it is almost impossible for the incumbent party to win the election. So if you want an answer to this election, you have a 52-48 split, and a lot of it has to do with inflation. You want a landslide victory? Look at Ronald Reagan in 1980, who won 489 electoral votes to his opponent's 49. Or look at 1972, when Richard Nixon carried every state but one and won 61% of the popular vote. Or look at Lyndon Johnson in 1964. Those are landslides. This is not a landslide. It's a close election, and it shows that you have a highly divided country. But to think that this is a landslide is kind of silly. And there's one other thing which I want to mention right up front. What's fascinating about this election is that in a number of states which former President Trump won and will now be the next president, Democrats kept a Senate seat, elected a governor. By the way, we now have 3 Jewish state governors with the first name of Josh. Right. The 3 Joshes.
Pennsylvania, North Carolina, and Delaware.
Yeah, they represent 6% of the governors are Jews named Josh.
Overrepresented. Let's pause there for a second. I appreciate the historical context in terms of landslides. Now, Rabbi Jacobson, there are a couple things. What Dr. Finkelman just described is true, of course, over a larger historical arc. Over the last 20, 30 years, we've been used to very close elections. And so when you have one party take all 3 branches, or take, I should say, both chambers of Congress and the executive branch, it feels like a landslide, even if the popular vote isn't that definitionally. And the other thing that's unique that you've been talking about over the last 48 hours and through the Meaningful Life Center is the resilience of this candidate feels different. Now, none of us were alive when Grover Cleveland served non-consecutive terms. I don't know how much of a comeback that was, but certainly both sides of the aisle are recognizing there is something different here. It is even the New York Times called it this a stunning political comeback. What do you think? Is this an existential election? Is it unique?
Well, I'm not going to get into the actual definition of a landslide. I'll allow for bigger experts than I. But let's talk about the psychology of it, and as well as the demographics. I mean, I've been reading the Democrats talk about the election, not the Republicans. And literally almost every one of them is saying that we need a real reckoning here. It's existential for them for sure, because they underestimated certain things. They didn't plan it right. They didn't read the electorate right. And even in places like New York and New Jersey, how did Trump get such an increase of votes? So they're in panic because is this a trend which can lead to Republican gains that can only grow? That's number one. So in that sense, I think there is an existential issue here. Also, I think I don't know the history, but I remember when Reagan was loathed, and I remember when Nixon was loathed. But something about Trump that's a lightning rod that everyone thought he was over with after January 6th, and that met many different setbacks, all the indictments and so on. So I think that contrast, a person was indicted, and everyone thought that was a slam dunk. Who's going to elect an indicted president, a criminal essentially, and many other such factors, that he should come back and win, and whether you call it a landslide or not, but definitely a decisive win, and didn't drag on. Everyone thought this may go on for several days. So I think psychologically and emotionally, and probably even from a demographic point of view, the winning of the Latino vote, minorities that usually Democrats attract, is definitely, and I'll use the words of Maimonides, when something happens so dramatic, you have to be insensitive and really a fool not to look and be introspective. I mean, it's easy to just dismiss this as a blip on the screen, an aberration, which was done the first time Trump won. But I think wise people should look into this and see what is going on. What are the factors at work? And maybe this is a time to be humbled, all of us.
Yeah, absolutely.
What is the American public really thinking? It doesn't even matter. The fact is he won. Whether he won by 1 million votes and if he had won a landslide, then what? Then it would be more dramatic? Yeah, it would be more dramatic. It's not about so much the Trump mandate or policies. It's more about what does America want. And maybe some people have lost touch with the average person in the street.
Well, that's why we're doing tonight's show, definitely to reflect and be introspective. It's interesting. I want to spend a little bit of time on the demographics. I'm a Latino Jew, so I'm both. I identify in both demographic camps. And Rabbi Jacobson, it's been interesting with both of those demographics. Over the last couple of days, you've talked about there's been a narrative around Trump beating Harris. In fact, Harris took about 56% of the Latino vote. What's different is that it's been going down for a number of years. So Biden at 63%. You go back to the Clinton years, and it was almost 80%. So it's not that there actually is winning the Latino vote. It's that there's much lesser support in that community. And I think the introspection is so important in terms of looking. It's a community that considers itself working class, and it's also a community that really appreciates capitalist success stories because so many Latinos have. One second, I'm going to ask you. I'm going to go to you at the question in a second. But what you are doing is catalyzing me to do it quicker. So here we go. I'll stop talking about the Latino vote. On the Jewish vote, there's also been discussion, and here, Professor Finkelman, I want you to give us some of the numbers about how there was a realignment around the Jewish vote being more for the GOP. And that's true in New York. It is true in New York. And the Orthodox community is, we're a larger portion of the Jewish voting population in New York than almost anywhere else in the country, probably simply anywhere else in the country. However, Professor Finkelman, where did the Jewish vote come out statistically in this election overall? Okay,
The Jews voted overwhelmingly for Harris. Trump got the lowest percentage of Jewish votes of any Republican in probably the last 40 years. We don't know exactly. And as I said at the beginning, we had 2 new Jewish governors elected in places, by the way, where there isn't much of a Jewish vote. I mean, the Jewish vote in North Carolina is pretty slim, and the Jewish vote in Delaware is pretty slim. 2 Jewish governors elected. That says something about, and by the way, they were both Democrats, even though North Carolina went for Trump as a Republican. I think it's far more complicated than this. When you look at the Latino vote, what you find is that more than 55% of Latino men voted for Biden, and only about 36% of Latino men voted for Harris.
Right.
So what we may see is not a sea change in party politics. What we may see is a response to the fact that there was a woman running for president, and in that community, and since you consider yourself part of that community, maybe you can explain it far better than me. It's clear that that community of Latino men was not ready to vote for a woman. That's a reality of American politics. That's something the Democratic Party has to figure out. And I completely agree with the rabbi here that the Democratic Party has to have a long and serious conversation with itself about why it is that it has lost this election.
We're going to need to take our first break. I'm going to come back to this after the break and talk about the more kind of the meta level, and within the Jewish American diaspora, there are some ways that this election speaks a new truth. At the top line, as Professor Finkelman just said, it isn't that, but as you get deeper into the numbers, it may be a realignment. We're going to be right back. Let me give you the number. We're live until 8 o'clock Eastern. Participate. Give us your sense. And we're going to also get into the show the emotional side, the spiritual side. How do we handle dislocation? Maybe we're feeling elated, but we have friends that are despondent, as said in the outset, or the opposite. We want to connect. We want to unify. We want to use this also as an opportunity to come together. We're going to be talking about that as well. We want to hear your reactions to the election. How are you feeling? What do you think? What are the lessons that you see in it, spiritual or demographic? The number to call live is 718-303-9090. That's 718-303-9090. You can ask a question to Professor Dr. Paul Finkelman and Rabbi Simon Jacobson. You can also text in or WhatsApp in a question or comment to 917-428-4062. Please don't call that number. It's just for texting or WhatsApping. 917-428-4062. We'll be right back.
Deny thy brother. A war's going on, but the reason's undercover. The truth is kept secret and swept under the rug. If you never know truth, then you never know love. Where's the love, y'all? Come on. I don't know. Where's the truth, y'all? Come on. I don't know. Where's the love, y'all?
Equal Footing is brought to you again this year by Mechanical Art Capital. Mechanical Art Capital is a simple business. It provides capital overnight, max in 2 days, to watch dealers and jewelry dealers as well as collectors. You can unlock the value of your inventory or collection. It is halachically sound. You're not getting a loan. It's a simple inventory buyback program, and it's very reasonably priced and accessible. Just download the Mechanical Art Capital app on your iPhone or Android device. You just go into your app store and you put in 3 words, Mechanical Art Capital. And you just upload a couple of photos or videos of your timepieces. You get an indicative bid within hours. You get money in your pocket within a day or 2 max. You can also go to their website, mechanicalartcapital.com.
I've been caught, but I'm keeping on to. And I've been told.
Post-election breakdown in the aftermath with spiritual guide and author and internationally acclaimed speaker, Rabbi Simon Jacobson, former president and legal and political historian, Dr. Paul Finkelman, former president of Gratz College, giving different perspectives on the importance, or maybe lack thereof, of this election, historically speaking at least. Rabbi, we were talking about the Jewish vote before, and I think many in the Orthodox community, or the observant community, this election not only feels different, but it is different. There's been that shift going on for a number of years that the Orthodox community has voted more Republican. But this time, given what's going on in Israel and the numbers bear it out in New York, overwhelming support for Donald Trump in the election within that community. And yet, as Professor Finkelman pointed out, the numbers went even more to the other side in, I hate to say non-observant, but in the non-Orthodox identifying across the various meanings of Orthodox, across that spectrum of the Jewish American diaspora, such that the aggregate numbers actually went up for the Democratic Party. But there's clearly been an underlining of that partisan shift that's going on within the Jewish American diaspora for a number of years. How do you feel about that, Rabbi? How should we process that? How do we stay unified as a Jewish American diaspora? And maybe even does it matter to stay unified?
Well, first of all, it's a fascinating phenomenon because considering what's going on in Israel, and I would assume that the majority of the Jews in the United States, secular or not, are pro-Israel, even if some may have more sensitivities toward what's going on in Gaza and so on, and yet remain stalwart and consistent Democrats. I live in New York. Anyone living in New York and California knows their vote, if they vote Republican, will never prevail, except the rare exceptions that were mentioned, Reagan and 84 and so on. But the fact of the matter is, I have many, many Jewish friends that are Democrats, and it's completely knee-jerk. I asked a few this year. I said, who are you voting for? They don't even care who the candidate is. They just vote Democrat. And they feel that the Democrats represent their liberal values. So on the positive side, I look at it this way. Jews actually introduced liberalism to the world. Remember, Abraham, in the Bible, introduced charity. He introduced taking care of the poor. He introduced the concept of giving, which is essentially a type of liberal socialism in a way. However, Jews were also traditionally conservative politically because they had to deal with enemies. Most of our history, we had to protect ourselves. So I think my analysis would be, as Jews began to assimilate, they retained that liberal side to them, and I think lost some of their conservative political views, and it's just a knee-jerk thing. I don't think it has anything to do with logic. And I'm not trying to dismiss their votes, because they have a right to vote as they see fit. But the only way I really understand it, in other words, there's something about the Democratic Party that they just feel an affinity to. And especially if Trump rubs people the wrong way with some of his abrasiveness, etc., I can see a lot of intelligent Jews, college-educated, just simply not being able to bring themselves to vote for him because they don't like him. Forget about his policies. So, as far as the Orthodox go ahead. The Orthodox are not really affected by that type of secularism. So they look at it more, who's best for Israel, who's best for the Jewish people. They don't really care about his style or not style. If he's going to be a bigger supporter of Israel, especially in the time of war, he'll be stronger in regard to Iran and so on. That would probably sway their vote.
Now, you both may roll your eyes when I say this. Absolutely, but let me, if I can, package it for a second. You both may think I'm naive when I say this, and I know my wife teases me about this. I'm an eternal optimist, and my feeling, and this is to some extent I think been borne out by some of the exit polls. Even the Jerusalem Post came out with a great article a few hours ago on this, that all Jewish voters in the United States are voting Jewish. That there isn't this idea that they're not paying attention to what's going on in Israel, not paying attention to anti-Semitism. It's just different Jewish voters are responding to those issues differently and thinking one candidate is better than the other, or prioritizing one quote unquote Jewish issue over the other. So, yes, Professor Finkelman, as a historian, do you feel that the Jewish vote, which you're right, hasn't voted this Republican since 2000, hasn't voted this Democrat since 2000, almost 80% Democrat in this election.
Actually, it's longer than that.
Okay. Do you think that there are some fault lines that cannot be repaired? Or do you think, like I do, that everyone's expressing their love for Israel and their love for the Jewish community in different ways, and that ultimately what underpins it is that the feeling, if not necessarily the vote.
Well, first of all, I think that many of the premises that Rabbi has stated are nonsense. If one looks at the most oppressive people to Jews, they were not moderates or liberals or even leftists. They were fascists like Adolf Hitler, which is clearly the right. They were the government of Spain, which expelled Jews from Spain. Anti-Semitism has always been and remains the noise of the right wing. Everywhere in the world, right-wingers are anti-Semites. Now, is there some leftist anti-Semites? Of course there are. But if you look at the history of the Jewish people were oppressed not by liberals, which, first of all, didn't exist. In fact, liberals are the ones who allowed them to vote in France, for example, after the French Revolution. But it is, you have a person running for president who said when neo-Nazis marched in Charlottesville, Virginia, that there were good people marching there. Well, in my world, anybody who is marching and singing, chanting, "The Jews will not replace us," and singing neo-Nazi songs or old-fashioned Nazi songs, they are not our friends. They are our enemies. They are anti-Semites. They are people who hate Jews. And when you have a man running for the president who goes to a Jewish audience and says, "If I lose, it's your fault," that is the most classic anti-Semitic canard.
Yeah, that was unfortunate.
It's not unfortunate. It is what he believes. And so when you look at this, you have to ask the question: if you are voting for Jews, if you are voting for the protection of the Jewish people, then how can you possibly, in your right mind, support somebody who says, "If I lose, I'm going to blame the Jews"? Well, that's what people like Hitler said. And it's really important. Well, give me one more second here, because the other piece of this is that Donald Trump has said that he is going to make this a more Christian nation. He has made that very clear. And a more Christian nation means a nation that will push upon Jews issues and policies that are dangerous to Jewish religious liberty and to Jewish people.
So we're going to see how this all plays out over the next months and years. But we're going to need to take a quick break.
Can I have a chance?
Yeah.
Can I comment here?
Yes, but can you do it in a minute? Because we're going to take our next break. And go ahead. Go ahead, Rabbi.
I see Dr. Finkelman likes to use the word nonsense. I find that a little arrogant. I could use nonsense on some of the things you're saying, because there are many, many Jews that don't agree with you, frankly. Clearly, listen. Let me. I was quiet. Let me speak. It's clearly where you stand. I did not want this program to become a political one, but it's clearly, you're not. You're definitely not pro-Trump, to put it mildly. I came to the program without any position, pro or anti, to discuss more us. But since you're making these statements on the radio here, I must respond. I mean, you can easily take lines from Kamala Harris and also say, based on different things that sound a little pro-not Israel. I mean, you can do anything you like. Many, many Jews, Dr. Finkelman, you need to remember, many Jews do not see Trump as anti-Semitic, as pro-Nazi, as pro-Christian. They don't see him that way at all. You're entitled to see him that way, but you have to remember many don't see it that way. I'm one of them. I have my issues with Mr. Trump, but that's not one of them. And frankly,
I'm just quoting him.
One second, for Israel, he may be a lot better, whether you like it or not. And
I'm just quoting Trump. I'm not. I'm not making it up.
Guys, I am going to call a pause just because we have to take a commercial break. I think it's interesting. It got here. I did program the show.
This program should not be a pro or anti.
It isn't, and it is, and you know me well enough to know that it isn't. What I was trying to get to, in a sense, and this may be the optimist in me, I'm kind of glad that it's gotten here, if for no other reason, it illustrates the need for the show, which we're going to get into in the second half, which is given that there are different opinions within our community, I think we can agree that we all have love for our community. I would imagine you have love and respect for the work that Gratz College has done. I would have to imagine, Professor Finkelman, that you have love for and respect for what the Meaningful Life Center has done. And we all ultimately are part of the same mishpacha. And the numbers do show that we have different views on who to vote for president. But the point of the show is to figure out now, in the aftermath, how do we unify and make peace as a community? I'm not going to pretend to boil the ocean. How do we do that as a nation? You know, the candidates themselves have been working on that over the last 48 hours. But as a community, how do we heal? How do we come together? And how do we recognize the differences of opinion, which are very emotional? I mean, I'm sure you can understand, Rabbi, that Professor Finkelman, who's supporting Harris, has got to feel down, very, very down right now and frustrated. Say, hey, don't you see what I see? And you, by the same token, you see things that you probably frustrated he doesn't see. But we definitely, I know this enough because I know both of you quite well, would know that both of you ultimately hold the other and the other's work and the other's community in great regard. And so how do we navigate this? We're going to be right back on equal footing. We're in the aftermath of the election. We're going to talk about the individual, the emotional, the anxiety management part of this, stress management part after the next break. Thanks for tuning in.
You're just like an angel. Your skin makes me cry. You float like a feather in a beautiful world. I wish
Equal Footing with Dove Tusman is sponsored by MDCS Dermatology, your experts in skincare. With 2 Manhattan locations and 4 offices in Long Island, including Plainview and Commack, the dermatologists and skincare surgeons at MDCS are proud to be affiliated with the Albert Einstein College of Medicine and New York Presbyterian Hospital. So schedule your next skin exam in one of MDCS's convenient New York area locations. To make an appointment, go to www.mdcs.live or call 212-661-DERM. That's 212-661-3376. You could even schedule a virtual video visit with MDCS's board-certified dermatologists from the comfort and safety of your own home. So go to www.mdcs.live or call 212-661-3376. And don't forget to mention Equal Footing for 15% off all cosmetic procedures.
I've been caught, but I'm keeping on to. And I've been told.
Hi, you're back on Equal Footing. I'm Dove Tusman, and I have a lot of issues with our current president, Joe Biden, politically, policy-wise. He gave a speech this morning, and he did say something he's been saying recently that I want to quote because I do think it's the right message. You can't love your country only when you win. You can't love your neighbor only when you agree. And I think that's even more important for such a tight-knit and ultimately historically persecuted community like our own. We got to kind of hang together even when we disagree. Rabbi Jacobson, I was also listening to this video that you put out. I think it was yesterday after the election, and you were also talking about trying to find common ground. And one of the things that I thought you expressed that touched my heart was the importance of overcoming adversity, and I felt like you were speaking also to those people that were disappointed in the electoral results, and saying this is an opportunity, as you said earlier in the program, for introspection, and also an opportunity to overcome the disappointment, and maybe I'm reading too much into it. Maybe kind of build bridges. What would be your advice now to a listener who, loves their Jewishness. It's a core part of their lives. They came to the view that Harris or their local Democratic candidate was better for them to vote for, and they've lost. What do you tell them right now?
As a matter of fact, I just recorded another few messages exactly in that spirit. One is called A Message to My Dear Friends and Supporters of Kamala Harris. Since we're mentioning Jews, I'll say this. We've been around for close to 4,000 years, counting from around Abraham's times. We've gone through every type of adversity, every type of challenge, from genocides to expulsions to pogroms and so on. So there's a bigger picture. We are not defined by our political candidates. Obviously, everyone is entitled, and I respect everyone's vote, whether it's for Kamala, whether it's for Trump. Everyone is entitled to vote as they see fit. But there's something bigger here. I was telling someone who had a lot of anxiety after this election, pro-Kamala, and I said, focus on your family, focus on the values you cherish, focus on love, focus on things that you're not defined by the candidates. So it's not a matter of gloating or being despondent. Obviously, there's disappointment when there's a loss, and there's certain elation when there's a victory. But we are bigger than that. The leaders come and go, and if you're going to paint it all in stark terms, that Trump is going to destroy democracy and fascism and Nazism, you're already painting a picture that is almost impossible to overcome, because you right now, it's doomsday. You should move out of the country. I think people have to start thinking more moderately, and some people talk about the Democrats that way, but that's doomsday, and so on. I think we are bigger than that. So I love every individual on earth, every citizen. I may not agree with them, but there's something that's greater than the elections and greater than the candidates, and that's the bottom line. Unfortunately, what I've seen is the personalization in politics. I find that as nonsense. I find it as superficial. It's childish to me when people start attacking individuals. There's principles. I know people hate Trump in the worst possible way. I mean, he was called Hitler. Let's be honest, that's what he was called. I understand where people come from, perhaps where they're going there, but to me, it's a zero-sum game when you go in that direction. Because then what happens when the other side starts attacking the other side as being Hitler? Then we're down to what? To like a spitting match. So I think it's an opportunity for us to all rise to the occasion. As a Jewish people, we brought to the world the values that everybody cherishes. When we read the Declaration of Independence, we hold these truths to be self-evident. All men are created equal, endowed by the Creator with inalienable rights. This comes straight from the Torah. It's straight from Judaism. And the Founding Fathers took it from there. Great book, On Two Wings by Michael Novak, that documents that. And that's what we need to talk about, how we get the country aligned to that. And the fact of the matter is that President Trump will now be the president, and what we have to do, whether you voted for him or not, is try to help him align himself to these values of America. And if Kamala had won, we'd have to do exactly the same thing. Yeah. I feel very equal in that sense.
Professor
so
Finkelman,
something bigger.
Sorry for the interruption.
Than these candidates. No, I'm done.
Let me ask you the same question to try to build bridges here. You're talking to a listener that is very excited about Trump's victory, a Jewish listener who voted with their neshama. I mean, they really were thinking that they were voting in a way that supports the community, supports Israel, etc. You don't necessarily agree, but what do you say to that person now that allows for there to be healing and a bridge to be built?
Well, the first thing I say is that you voted because you made a political choice, but you have to look at what you are supporting. Now, Rabbi Jacobson said we could talk about how bad Kamala Harris was to the Jews. I would ask him, although this is not the forum, to show me one anti-Semitic statement she made. I would ask him to show me one statement where anybody in the Biden or Harris side said the Nazis in Charlottesville were good people. I would ask him.
We're going back.
I would ask. I'm speaking now. I'm speaking now.
But you're not answering. You're not answering the question. I'm asking that we've been there already in the dialogue. I'm not expecting you guys to agree politically. What I'm asking is, what do you tell the voter that builds a bridge? What do you tell the voter that you don't agree with in the aftermath of this very divisive election that builds a bridge of understanding and love? Another Jewish voter that you don't agree with.
I would ask them to look at the facts, look at the quotations, look at the statements, look at the policies, not the rhetoric, not the lies, not a party which says we believe in alternative facts. When you say, for example, that Vice President Harris was not supportive of Israel, the Biden administration has given billions of dollars worth of military equipment to Israel.
So you're still trying to convince that voter.
No, I'm not trying to convince that voter. I'm asking that voter, when they take their positions, to actually look at the reality, not the rhetoric. Okay. And the reality is...
So let me reframe the question for you, Rabbi, because I'm living this right now. Hang on one second. I'm going to reframe the question. When
I hear that, I hear that Professor Finkelman is not willing to say he may be wrong. He's absolutely right. And everybody else is wrong. They have to...
No, I'm not absolutely right, but I'm not... But when you say that Harris says things that are anti-Semitic, I'd like you to give me an example of that, as opposed to a presidential candidate who tells the Jews, if I lose, it's your fault. If that's not anti-Semitism, I don't know what it is.
Yeah, guys, let me reframe it. Right? Really, please hang with me let me give it a shot. I think there are a lot of listeners right now who are listening to this conversation, and it's reminiscent of conversations that they're having in their lives, maybe even in the same family, certainly in the same friend group. And the reason for doing the show tonight was actually to try to help solve this. So I'm going to actually abstract from the political for a second. I don't care what the policy positions are. There's also a way to look at this that has to do with emotions. And even as I'm listening to you, to both of you, because I'm a peacenik and conflict avoidant and all the other stuff I've learned when we have therapists on the show. Rabbi, right now I feel anxious. I feel stressed. I feel stressed because there are two people that I care about and respect that are at odds with each other. And that's true right now on the show. It's true in my own family. It's true in my own friend group. It's true in the floor of the building I live with in New York. It's true at the gas station that I go to or upstate, or a place in the Catskills. It's true everywhere. And I'm a lover, not a fighter. And so I would ask you, Rabbi, how do I manage that stress right now? I'm not asking for a political point at all. What do I do as a Jew when I'm confronted with the conflict in front of me? What kind of Torah wisdom can you give me in terms of that particular type of stress, which feels so much more acute when it's within our own family, when it's within our own Jewish community?
I would just go back to what I said before and just replay the recording, that we should not be defined by elections. We shouldn't be defined by candidates. We're a people that are a godly people that brought higher values to this world. This country, the United States, is founded on those values. And that's what you need to embrace. Think about your family. Think about your values. Think about what you love. I mean, does it really make a difference to your children? I don't think it does. So I honestly don't feel, and I'm actually offended by you. I'm not in this debate. I am not making a case here. I was just responding to what was being said on the platform here. I was responding. I'm not here to debate Kamala and Trump regarding Israel or Jews and so on. My attitude actually in coming to this program was to say exactly that. We're here long before the United States is only 250 years old. And we have values that we have brought to the world. That's what we should be fighting for. And in that sense, I look at everyone, whether they voted for Trump or they voted for Harris, as my brother or sister, and let's join together in that battle, which is the battle of light over darkness, love over hate, peace over war, and to do whatever we can to make that happen. Be part of the solution, not part of the problem. To me, engaging in this type of discussion is something that I would never have come on this program, frankly, if that's what was going to happen. Because it's not my thing. I'm not interested in such a debate whether Trump said this and how you interpret it and prove that, and not accepting that there are Jews that may disagree with you about this matter.
I'll try a moment of levity. There's a listener named Wayne who is a history professor. It's actually been on the show before. Who's written in to say that if we go back historically over the elections in the United States, especially the presidential elections, you're going to find that almost after every one, there's discussion about the unity or disunity of the Jewish vote. We do manage to come together. We come together in the ways we do every year, and holidays and through values, as the rabbi is saying. We are allowed to disagree in the voting booth and agree on most everything else. So I appreciate you saying that, Wayne. I do think it all comes from a good place. And Rabbi, I rarely ever challenge you. One thing I would challenge to say is I'm really glad you came on the program, because these are the discussions that are happening, and I think figuring out how to navigate them, at least for me.
But Dov, I've had hundreds of such conversations. I don't need another one like this because it doesn't go anywhere.
Okay. Well, here's a question I'll ask you guys both that came in from another listener. Let me pull this up that is maybe different than what you've heard before. Okay. This is a listener, Isabel, who is asking what the advice would be. And she actually I want advice from both of you. I want advice from a rabbi and I want advice from a professor with respect to when I disagree with my child. Now, my child is not quite an adult, but a late teen who thinks they're an adult. We are on opposite sides of the political spectrum. I don't love them any less, but I find it difficult to know what to say. P.S. I'm not going to tell you, and I don't think it matters, which side I'm on and which side she's on. So let's start with you, Professor Finkelman. What do you advise Isabel with? It sounds like maybe a freshman in college.
I would advise Isabel to sit down with the child and say, let's write out on a piece of paper what we think and what we believe. Let's set it out for each of us. And let's actually back it up with some research, do some study, learn what your position is. And then let's sit and talk about where we go. I agree with you completely, by the way, that the country has to come together. But I think the difference between the rabbi and I is that I think you have to come together based on what are the stated principles of the country and the stated principles of people who run the country. For example, if somebody said,
"Hang on, we're going to run out of time." Rabbi, the other list. Rabbi, what do you tell Isabel? I'm sorry, I just heard listeners waiting on the line as well. Rabbi, what do you tell Isabel?
Well, this is a common challenge we all have. I think we have to remember, especially when you're talking to your child, that your love for your child is deeper than the agreements or disagreements. Which means, if you allow a disagreement to override the essential love between two people, you'll really destroy things. So I would tell my child, look, we may disagree. We can try to, in a civil way, discuss it, debate it, but always know that I love you from the depths of my heart, even if we disagree. And I think that has to be the most important thing. What I find is that people get so locked in to the point even of arrogance to their opinion, they just are unable to hear the other. And I think my child needs to hear that I am open to hearing any position. Let's discuss on it. Try to convince you.
I want to take a listener's question quickly and see if I can figure this out. And I'm going to ask for help in the booth if I get this wrong. Okay, I think we've got you on the air. We've got another listener waiting. Can you hear me? Line 3.
I can hear you.
Hello, I think this is Stan.
I'm afraid it is.
Nice to hear you, Stan. What's up? What's your question?
I don't have a question for these people. It's a waste of time to speak to both of these people.
What's your comment?
Just a minute. One of them, I would tend to agree with the other one. Waste of time. I'm not going to say who's who. But the point is
what's your comment or question?
Here's the comment. Very simple. This election isn't over. Okay?
You mean because of the House?
Yes. Now, it's very simple. It doesn't take brain science to figure this out. He doesn't want to talk politics. The other guy does. We'll know within the weekend or by Monday and Tuesday. If the House of Representatives changes to Democratic, then the leader of the Democratic Party is not Joe Biden or Miss Harris or Chuck, what's his name, Schumer. It will be the gentleman from New York.
Yeah,
the speaker will be, I forgot his name.
Hakeem Jeffries.
Hakeem Jeffries. And that will stop Donald Trump in his tracks.
I do think, and I'm gonna leave the listener there, but I do think it's a valid point. I did caveat that at the beginning of the program that Americans love divided government, and in a certain sense, it's healthy. And there, I think even talking about these things out in the open and disagreements can be healthy. Okay, we've got, I think, Rifki from Borough Park.
Yeah.
Rifki, we're almost at the end of the show. Nice to hear your voice.
I'm listening to your program, and you're making me feel very sad listening to it.
Tell me why.
You know, everyone around here in Borough Park is very happy. For once in I don't know how long, all the Hasidim all agreed that they wanted to vote for Trump. The Gera, the Satma, the Vishnitz, they all agreed that they're voting for Trump.
So why does it make you sad? That sounds wonderful.
And now that he won, everybody's walking around happy. And on one of the programs I was listening to, they played Happy Days Are Here Again. You know, they turned the clock this week, and they claimed that when they turn the clock, you get depressed. And actually, Sunday and Monday, I was feeling a little down.
But Rifki, why does it make you sad? What's everything sounds great. I'm confused why you're sad.
Listening to your program, Rabbi Jacobson or maybe the other gentleman, they seem like they're trying to bust our bubble. Like, it's true that Trump is not God, and he's going to have a much harder time this time than he had last time. And God, Hashem should help that things should go well. But Biden was terrible and awful, and nobody wanted to spend another year like that with Biden.
Well, Rifki, I'm happy that you're feeling that elation around you. And the last thing that we were trying to do tonight was make you sad. Listen, I'm a bleeding heart, so when I see other people hurting, I hurt. And so the point of tonight's program is to recognize there's half of the country hurting. Now, if you look at the Jewish community, and Rifki, I consider myself a part of the observant community. Now, you joke about that. Like, I never feel like I'm observant enough, but I identify as part of that community that's feeling elation. And it is a community that voted overwhelmingly in support of Trump. But it's important to recognize that a Jew is a Jew is a Jew. And 80% of American Jewry voted for Harris. 80%. So it's relevant, and I think we should not be in echo chambers. It is relevant because I think the Jewish American community is closer when we communicate with each other and we're not factionalized. And so what I would just close by asking, I don't think I'm going to have time unless you guys can be incredibly brief, and so I'll try it. 20 seconds each. What is something that you would like to see over the next 4 years that would surprise you to the positive in whatever you might be concerned about? Rabbi Jacobson, what would be something positive around these next 4 years that you'd be shocked and delighted to see?
That every Jew on earth, and that 80% as well, the 100% of Jews in this country, would rise above politics and do everything possible proactively to advance the cause of justice and love and understanding.
Amen.
And pro-Israel and pro-Jewish support.
Amen. Professor Finkelman, big challenge. You got 20 seconds.
I would like to see everybody in Borough Park who is happy to remember the Jewish admonition to love their neighbor and to put tikkun olam as a major part of their life, and to look at policies and to look at government and saying, what is government doing for those people who need the most help, who need to be lifted up?
Amen. We're going to run out of time. I respect and care for both of you. Thank you, Professor Finkelman. Thank you, Rabbi Jacobson.
Shoot me down, but I get up. I'm bulletproof, nothing to lose. Far away. Ricochet, you take your aim. Fire